into Retirement, an unusual podcast about finding purpose, meaning, and balance after a busy working life, with David Ailing Smith and Peter Taylor. Exploring the emotional, psychological, and practical realities of modern retirement through a series of reflective conversations undertaken whilst walking scenic routes across the UK.
Hi, Daz.
Hello, Peter. How are you? Have you recovered from your saunter down the Thames?
Yes, I've done that. So yeah, that was a good one. Thank you very much. And again, I must remind you of the sequencing of these podcasts. You keep referring to things that are in future, past tense, or whatever. But I learned something this week that is interesting. So actually, I was watching something, and they referred. So we all know about the midlife crisis. Yeah, it's a very famous term, and we've all probably been through it in some way, shape, or form. I certainly bought a sports car at one point in my life. But there was some young people talking about the quarter life crisis that younger people go through.
Right.
But I looked it up, and there is an accepted term which is three-quarter life crisis, which is what I am currently going through. So I know elderescence is a great term, but there is another one out there which is quarter life crisis, which is that whole process, that point in time where you kind of we have to rethink and readjust or readjust all of that. And I think it's going to be a great topic for a future podcast, but yeah, not for today, because we've got a very interesting guest today, haven't we?
No, we have. Well, but it's not called elderescence. I still think that's the word. I think that's the word that is going to be adopted.
I'm not taking elderescence away from you. I'm not. I'm just saying that this. I don't know. It's three-quarter life crisis. It kind of stuck home with me, really. And I've got a lot of other stuff behind that, so we'll come to that.
All right, very good. But as you say, this is the episode today is a visitor day, and very much looking forward to talking with a colleague and friend of ours. And in the past, we've covered various scenarios from people who have left work, gone back to work, enjoyed leaving work, not enjoyed leaving work. And so I think we've got a different flavour on that again today. So perhaps with that introduction, welcome, David.
Thank you, Daz. Good to hear from you, and you too as well, Peter.
Yeah, very, very pleased to have you on, David. And perhaps as a little bit of positioning, you in the past have been an HR professional. I mean, you're still professional, but you have retired now, and so fascinated to get your perspective on your retirement from someone that's sort of watched lots of people go through this over the years, David. So very much looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's been an interesting time. So I prefer to say that I actually left corporate life 3 years ago. And because for me, I always felt that the retirement word was not what I was going to focus on. It was very much about, I wanted to do something different, right? I wanted to move away from, the corporate life, which I'd been in for about 30, 35 years. And, I'd thought long and hard about it, but obviously when it comes and when it arrives, it's a very different kind of feeling.
Yeah, no, I wanted to go there with you because, you and I have, had periodic coffees, haven't we, over the years, David? We live relatively close to each other. And I do remember, just sort of recognizing that you were very much looking forward to stopping the corporate side of your life, spending more time with your wife. You've got lots of hobbies, lots of parts of the world you wanted to travel to, and you, from my perspective, you had it sorted. You had a plan and you were going to act on the plan. But I know from talking to you subsequently that it actually didn't quite turn out that way, just perhaps from an emotional or realization point of view. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's the essence of
the plan. Yeah.
I mean, changes. Yes.
Well, it does, Peter. That's very true. And I think it's right to say that it all kind of, the emotional started about 12 months before I kind of left corporate life, where we started having what many people probably have spoken about already, the need to be confident that we would have money going forward. And, the interesting part of that process for me was this, which was of the three financial advisors we spoke to, they all had the same premise, which was, probably, David, you're going to die before your wife. All right. And that was the answer. To a point when the third one started talking about it, I did ask him, did he have a date in mind? of when that was going to happen, so we could be really prepared for it. So, of course, that starts a very different kind of mindset to the process of leaving an organization and being more reliant on other kind of ways of money coming into the household, if you like. But you're right. Look, I've coached a large number of people, and I've talked to a large number of people before leaving. I've read a couple of books. So I was about 9 to 12 months out from retirement when I was already planning it. But I have to say, the weekend after I left the organization, I started to have those kind of strange emotional kind of reactions, which is, on Friday afternoon, I was a relatively important person, relative being the operative word.
Yes.
And then on Monday, no one wanted to email me, or no one wanted my advice or counsel, or no one wanted to talk to me at that stage. And that was the first realization, I think, of that loss of something. Yeah.
I think that's when I got the call, wasn't it, David?
It was. I needed coffee with somebody. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, just pausing there for a moment, and that is such an interesting observation, and we've heard it in different ways. I've certainly experienced that. And Peter, you've newly stopped, haven't you? So can you relate to that? Was that how that felt for you a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, it does. It is that kind of. I mean, I mean, so David, you referred to it's quite a again for you quite a long lead time into this, but it still impacted you when you reached that point. And I think for me, it's not a shorter period of time, but I knew what was coming. 3 months or probably 6 months ago, really, what was going to happen and where I would be. But yes, it does. I saw that slow decline of I became unimportant and irrelevant as the organization I worked for moved on. It was nice they were still paying me, but the reality is, in the early days, there was a lot of work to hand the reins over to someone else and help restructure. But yeah, like you say, David, suddenly there were no emails and there were no things in the diary that weren't me making things happen. So it's a very, very strange time, very strange point of transition.
If it helps either of you, you're both still important to me. I don't know whether that makes any difference whatsoever.
Oh, thank you, Dad. There we go.
Oh, that's very good of you, Dad. Yeah.
And David, before perhaps we go into how you navigated those early weeks and months, we have talked about that a little bit previously. What could you tell us what you were looking forward to? So what did that retirement or elderescence, as I'm trying to describe now, what did that mean to you? Other than an early death, what were you?
Yes, that's right.
What were you looking forward to?
Predetermined actuarial death. Yes, that's right.
What were you looking forward to, David?
Yeah, look, I think for me, because of that leading time, I had done quite a bit of thinking about what I wanted to do and how I wanted things to be, which, when I reflected on it in the end, helped me through that initial stage. And that was, I wanted to stay in control of what I did. Whatever I did next, I wanted to be in control, because you know what? I've never met anybody in corporate life who is in control, really, of their day-to-day work. And if I've missed them, I missed out on meeting somebody important. But I think the reality is, regardless of what position you're in, there is always that need to be doing things for other people in the timescale they are deciding, and working with the people that, in some cases, you got little choice but to do so. So for me, it was very much about the future was about, how do I stay in control and do different things than I'd been doing for the last 30 years. And that was a big driver for me.
And did you have a bucket list of things you wanted to try, or did you have sort of ongoing passions that you wanted to exercise? I mean, I remember, David, you historically been a very keen cyclist, haven't you? You've traveled with your cycling, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, keeping fit and doing things like that was always going to be, very much on top of my agenda. And luckily that's kind of continued. And basically what I always felt is that by the end of my career, I was known as the expert, not to me, by the way, but to other people. You're the expert. So in terms of what you were able to learn and do differently, and it was starting to become limited. So whatever I was going to do, I was going to throw myself into learning, go back to that kind of approach of being really curious and in environments where it didn't matter that much as it used to when you're in corporate life, if you like.
Yes.
So I used to be keen on photography many years ago, and I was convinced that that was something I wanted to do, which I've now done and spent a lot of time with. Golf is something that I never had much time to do, so I wanted to improve the way that I played. And probably more important, the most important part for me was that I decided that I would qualify and become a formal executive coach, if you like. That is coaching leaders who end up kind of in a position where they're going through transition, they need to move on, and they want that kind of external voice to kind of support them going through that. So in each of those areas, I knew there were kind of avenues that I wanted to kind of explore and go down. And I committed myself to each of those three by going on courses, being part of learning kind of groups, and being able to have the time to throw myself into it.
Well, I mean, that sounds like you've been busy. It sounds like you've sort of classically done that thing that we've often spoken about on this podcast, that you've partially reinvented yourself and pushed boundaries in a way that you weren't able to do at work. So that still sounds like a very successful transition, David. But I know from talking to you that going back to those early weeks, it didn't feel like that to you, as I recall. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? Yeah. I remember you telling me how sort of discombobulated you were about the whole having this time available to you.
Absolutely, and regardless of the fact I had those elements in my mind that I wanted to progress, and there were no restrictions on me moving forward with any of those activities except for myself, right? And it does come back to the emotional element of purpose. So what's my purpose? Who am I? And I really do feel that the work I had done previously had allowed me to relink into that and kind of move on. But I also used to find things, simple symbolic things. When I was in corporate life, like most people, particularly after COVID, and we had kind of moved to work more and more from home, I spent a lot of time on back-to-back meetings. I covered Australia through the day to India to Europe, and then my bosses were in America, not unlike a lot of people. And I used to find myself running between meetings to make tea so I could kind of jump on the next call a bit refreshed. And after I left corporate life, I remember one day down in the kitchen, I was running from the kettle to the fridge to get the milk, to the cupboard, get the tea bag. And my wife said to me, "Why are you rushing? Why are you rushing?" But I was still in that kind of mindset of, I've got to get the cup of tea as quickly as possible because I'm sure there's going to be a call I need to attend. And there's those little symbolic kind of actions that I was still living through as a kind of, as a reminder, if you like, of not wanting to let go to the things that I had to do for many years.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm going to ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Peter, whether you've had any symptoms like that since you've left corporate life temporarily.
Of course, it is. I mean, certainly, is the readjustment of pace is an interesting one, which we've talked before about. I'm productive when I'm busy, and when I'm I have too much time, effectively, then I become a little bit less. But one of the points about the that kind of three-quarter life crisis, etc. One of the common signs is this kind of almost a loss of motivation, which is it is driven by the reduction or removal of that agenda or pace that's provided to you by your organization or anything else you've been involved in, and it is one of the big pivots that you have to go through. So I totally recognize that.
My one, and you'll laugh, Peter, because you'll recognize this about me. I mean, anyone that's ever worked with me know I like to have my lists. I have my sort of my macro lists and my micro lists, the long-term things, the short-term things. And like to have what I used to call prayer meetings at the beginning of the week and talk about what was going to happen that week. And then that was a working habit for me that has actually always extended to my personal life in terms of trying to balance the things that I do between social things and tasks and exercise and that sort of thing. But of course, trying to present Beverly, my wife, with a prayer meeting list on Monday morning didn't end well the first time I did it. And you sort of think, okay, well, this doesn't work in this setting. That sort of my need to organize myself on a regular basis actually doesn't mean that those around us appreciate it or indeed need that. And I think we do need to do a podcast, Peter, where we involve a partner at some point, because I think it's a huge transition for them in a way that, again, we often talk about in a sort of a jokey way, but I think it's important. And David, can I ask you about, because your wife's an HR professional as well, so she'll have seen what's going through. How she coped with you being at home, David, with this refreshed sense of purpose?
Well, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because if I track back a little bit, the pre-work with the financial advisor was to actually determine whether or not I could leave corporate life, and then at what stage could she do that as well. And you're right, she's got a background in coaching leaders, etc. So when it came to me in the first couple of months after I left corporate life, feeling a little bit discombobulated, as you mentioned early on, she helped. She helped enormously, because she could kind of talk to me in a way which had that kind of level of empathy, but also she was in preparation for what she was going to go through herself as such. Yeah. So I think she coped with me being out of corporate life better than I did, actually. And the interesting thing was, when she eventually retired, which was a year later or 2 years later, then there was another readjustment for the both of us being in the house, and the both of us doing things that we really wanted to do, where she's got some passions for other things as well. And all of a sudden you're entering into a relationship which 3 years ago was quite simple. 3 years ago it was, we both got up at 6:30, we both had breakfast, we both went into a different office, and we both spent the day working, and then came back together about 7:00 at night. Now it was very different, so that's added a different kind of level of adjustments that you have to make when the two of you are kind of no longer engaged on a full-time basis in corporate work. And there's no substitute to just talking it out and understanding it.
We definitely got to do this sort of couples therapy call, Peter, I think, because do you remember there was that really funny advert on television a few years ago where there were two people talking about married life, I think, and the woman was saying, I want to travel, I want to go and see the world, I want to visit interesting places, and the bloke was sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea, says, I just want to be together. Remember that advert? That always made me laugh. And so people are different, aren't they? People evolve differently, and I suspect it is very challenging for some couples when they get to spend time together, and they have different expectations or requirements from this elderescence period. That's such an interesting topic. And David, how long is it for you now? How long have you been out of the corporate sector for?
3 years, almost to the day. 3 years almost. Okay, to the day.
And sort of looking back on it now, from that sort of 3 years of experience of having done it, worked through those early tricky periods, focused on those areas that you wanted to focus on, and I'm sure you do this as part of your practice. But what would you advise people approaching retirement to do? How would you discuss with someone who's approaching it from the learnings that you've had? What advice would you give them and perhaps our listeners?
The interesting thing on that question is that what I've learned is that I'm not going to tell anybody anything, because everybody has that kind of difference in their lives, the kind of things they want to achieve. What I would say I've learned probably about myself is that it really helped before I left corporate life, stating how I wanted to feel as opposed to what I wanted to do. Okay.
Mm,
And I think that's
interesting.
really important for me. And it's the one thing that I've constantly gone back on. So the two things I wanted to feel was, one, I wanted to stay in control. And for example, I've been fortunate enough, my executive coaching work has really ramped up, and I'm currently coaching, I believe, 10 people. And I've now been able to say with a particular organization, that's it for a while. I don't want to do any more for a while. Yeah. And I do that with real comfort and confidence. Whereas years gone by, I would have been saying, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that kind of thing. So that initial view of how I wanted to feel has become more important than what I actually do. And then the growing to learn, that was my second. I want to learn new things. I don't want to just stay where I am. I remember going my first photography course up in the Lake District with 6 other kind of, what I would call them nerds. They were so clever and technically competent. But the process of learning was very simple. You were given some instruction in the day, you took some photographs. In the night, you were critiqued and given feedback. And that is like most learning that you go through in corporate life and work life. And it was the same with executive coaching. When I went to Ashridge, you were given a framework, you were given practice, and then you were given feedback. And it's the same with golf because you get videoed. What's important about that is that in each of those 3 areas, I was more focused on feeling, staying in control and growing rather than how would I look to other people in the organization, which sometimes for a senior leader can be restrictive in the true development for them as leaders.
Well, and hats off to you, David. Because actually, I think there's a dichotomy here, actually, in terms of, you said very eloquently your need or your wish to be in control of the things you do. But of course, learning, you're out of control, aren't you? I think that's why it's uncomfortable, because you put yourself in a situation where you don't know anything, or you know very little, and therefore you don't know what's coming. And so I think that's quite an interesting dilemma, really. And obviously you get to a point when you can control, but as you're learning, you are out of control, aren't you? You don't know what's happening. You got surrounded by these technical, clever people. And so there's an area of discomfort, I would suggest, that you put yourself into, but you were motivated to do it, I think. And it sounds like you were motivated to do it because you wanted to sort of get your photography under control in a way that you could enjoy it better, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that is a dichotomy, but I also think as well that it was always in my control how much I wanted to learn, right?
I see.
So, yes. And how much equipment do I want to buy? What kind of genre of photography do I want to go down the route? If someone's saying to me, well, you're never a photographer if you don't have a certain piece of equipment. Well, I felt in control of what I wanted to do of that. So I think there's an element of putting yourself in a level of uncertainty, but still feeling if I'm going to get out of control in that process, then I'm going to walk away from it because it's not going to be of interest to me, and I'm not going to grow. Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I had 2 photographs assessed by a judge, and I felt like I was going back to school. I really did. I was nervous. They stood up. They started critiquing it. I was thinking, oh my God, they're going to say it's rubbish, and, this person needs to sell their camera. What were they thinking? And that was also a very exciting kind of moment for me.
Isn't that interesting? Because as an HR professional, you will inherently appreciate the act of giving and receiving feedback, won't you? And it sounds like all your insecurities were surfacing there, David, in a way. Absolutely. I'm sure those photographic judges were equally skilled at giving feedback in a conscientious way. But isn't that interesting how your insecurities basically blew away all your 40 years of professional understanding of what the importance of feedback is?
Well, that's right. And that's my takeaway, which is if in an organizational life, you can create an environment where people feel that little bit of anxiety, that little bit of, if you like, acid in the tummy, but feel okay about making mistakes and getting it wrong.
Yeah.
which very often, in my experience, and certainly the higher you go up the tree in an organization, the more optics you've got on you.
Yeah.
You know, people are making comments about how good you are, what you did, what you said, how you appear. Whereas in the environments I was, it kind of, at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. Right?
Yeah.
It didn't really matter.
Yeah. It was fascinating, David. And perhaps just one last reflection. When the fact you've chosen coaching as one of your areas of focus is interesting. Clearly, you're a very experienced coach, and I know you've mentored many people in addition over the years. But one of the themes that we've heard from people as they retire is this thing about giving back, using your experience in a way that helps other people. And I appreciate coaching. It's a commercial engagement you've been talking about, but I'm wondering how important that was to you to find a way to use your experience and that more perhaps altruistic outlook of how to apply your skills.
I think that's a really good point to think about, and I did think long and hard about it, and it came out in a very practical way when I was talking to various people who had left companies and become coaches, and I spoke to maybe 8 or 9 people I know have done that, and part of the conversation, how much you're going to charge, people. And I can remember saying, well, to be honest with you, I'm doing this for different reasons. I'm doing this because I believe I could help people to move forward as they transition in various ways in the organization. Oh no, if they're chief executives, you need to charge this. If they're executives, you need to charge that, etc. And what I've found where I've landed is that I am working with an organization where the average age profile is something like 28. And that I'm finding as being really, really interesting for me. And I know interesting is one of those non-words, but it's one of those activities where I think I believe I'm genuinely helping an individual go forward.
Yeah.
And that is equally as important as how much I get paid for it, to be quite honest with you and be very blunt.
Yeah, well, and that purpose, that sense of satisfaction in doing what you're doing, I think it's a very high calling to help younger people achieve their potential. So I completely get that. This has been fascinating, David. I'm so interested to hear your story, and it's a great story. You prepared, you knew what was coming, that it happened, and it was a bit tricky, but you kept your path, and you've focused on how you felt through the process, which has carried you through into what I'm sure is a very happy time for both you and your wife. So thanks for sharing that today, David. That's been really interesting.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Thank you very much, Des, and thank you, Peter.
Yeah, and I picked up, I think, on that. It's very encouraging, the fact that this R point, this retirement state is the learning, the growth, the opportunity, the giving back. It's not over. It's just a pivot point, and I think that's a very important message. So thank you.
You have been listening to Walking into Retirement, an unusual podcast about finding purpose, meaning and balance after a busy working life with David Ayling-Smith and Peter Taylor. Find out more at www.walkingintoretirement.com, and why not share your own retirement stories with the hosts?